Welcome to the Germinate podcast, where agriculture, business, and innovation take root and thrive. I'm Joe Sampson, and with nearly 2 decades of experience in agricultural equipment and scaling businesses, I'm here to bring you actionable insights, inspiring stories, and strategic advice. Whether you're an industry veteran or just starting out, this podcast is your guide to cultivating ideas, expanding your knowledge, and growing your venture. So let's get started and germinate your path to success. All right, how we doing, folks? Welcome back to the Germinate podcast. Got a very special guest today, Henning Schwinum, which is a very German name, Henning. So I want you to tell us all about that here right off the bat. So Henning, like I said, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us who you're with, and we'll get rolling here.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, for having me. Indeed, born and raised in Germany, came to the U.S. about 12 years ago, and came here for a job, fell in love, got married, and now I keep telling people that I'm stuck, but in a good way.
There you go.
But I guess that's not why we're talking today. Business-wise, I started a business called Vendux, which is a matchmaker for fractional sales leadership executives in the US and Canada. And we've been operational for about 5.5 years now. We place executives with a variety of companies from all industry verticals, but we focus solely on sales leadership roles.
Yeah. I kind of came across Vendux in sort of a strange way, actually. I don't know if I told you this story or not, but I was doing some chat GPT research, and the next thing I knew, Vendux came up, and I'm in the exploring all my options phases. So I reached out to you, we formed a connection, and now here we are recording a podcast. So I just to go back a little bit, Vendux is a 5-year-old company. What did you do before Vendux, and how did you get the idea to start? And what inspired you to get this launched?
Yeah. To your comment about ChatGPT, it's a little scary when you show up as
Isn't
a
it?
ChatGPT.
Yeah, I know.
I use it myself, and I am always looking for, of course, for other sources of information. But if otherwise, it feels a little bit like you're regurgitating information if you show up as the sole source of information on ChatGPT.
You weren't the sole source, but you were one of many sources. Sorry to interrupt you there, but yeah, it is a very interesting form of technology. And, I always say you might as well embrace it because it's coming here, whether we like it or not, but it is interesting for sure.
Yeah. So back to your question earlier,
Sure.
I
Yeah.
spent about 25 years of my career as a sales leader. So I led sales teams, built sales teams, transformed sales teams for 25 years, started in the chemical industry, and then also sold professional services, SaaS, software products. Ended up with Underwriter Laboratories, UL, here in the US. And did my sales jobs both in an entrepreneurial setting with a startup, but also in a corporate setting with a large German chemical company. And then UL is somewhere in the middle. When I finished my last corporate sales leadership role, my original intent was to become a fractional executive. And when I started that, I had 2 realizations very quickly. The first one was that I wasn't well connected enough. I didn't know enough founders, owners, CEOs, board members, investors. So people who make decisions about bringing a fractional sales leader on board. And when I looked for a matchmaker, for an agency who could help me find those roles, I couldn't find one. Not one with a focus on sales leadership roles. The ones I found were covering the entire C-suite, but to me that I didn't feel represented in that, and hence decided to pivot and build that matchmaker. Very simple product market fit assumption. what I'm missing, others must be missing too. A few phone calls validated that, and that led me to start Vendux.
I gotcha. And just to rewind back a little bit, you had a 25-year career in sales leadership. There comes a moment in all of ours time in that career where we have this, whether it's a feeling, an event that happens in life, whatever the case may be, where you're like, you know what, I want to stop this and move on to starting my own thing, starting something new. And in your case, what was that feeling, or what was that? What was that start of that journey? What did it look like for
Yeah.
you?
Well, I had worked for a startup before, and I joined them very early in the journey, and I always felt like a founder, though I
Yeah,
never was. And I always wanted to start a business, but always thought that I wasn't creative enough to come up with an idea that was worthwhile to build a business around and that would actually stand a chance to be successful and not end up in the heap of all the failed startups. And
sure,
when I came to this point, to this crossroad, where I was missing something and I felt I had the expertise to build it, um, that was like a eureka moment for me. And then to say, okay, I'm embarking on it. This is what I've been waiting for a good part of my career.
sure.
Let's embrace this and go ahead.
I see. Yeah, it's that eureka moment that is interesting and exciting for everybody.
Yeah.
So lust you have, and then you have this creative idea for Vendux. Why Vendux, by the way? What's in the name? Just out of curiosity.
They play on two Latin words, right? Venditio in Latin means sales, and dux means leadership. So it is
Hmm,
literally sales leadership merged together in Latin.
I see. Perfect. That's actually very, very creative. So yeah, obviously it's born. You have this kind of pivotal eureka moment to create this a space where you didn't see a lot of perhaps competition or really any competition. You just saw, okay, there's tons of fractional places out there, but there's CEOs or COOs or financial CFOs, but none for sales leadership. So Vendux is born, and I guess question one with Vendux is, what do you think sort of sets you apart in this space for companies to reach out to you and say, fractional leadership is the way to go today, specifically versus years in the past, or even the recent near future? What sets you
Yeah,
apart?
yeah, let's talk about what sets fractional sales leadership apart first. We
Sure,
can talk
sure, of
about
course.
Vendux later, because 5 years ago, it wasn't about promoting Vendux. It was about promoting the idea of fractional sales leadership. I always tell the story that 5 years ago, I had to explain what that means in every single conversation. Today, not so much anymore. There are
Hmm.
still questions around how does that apply to me? How can I make this work in my organization, in my company? But the basic idea is better known today than it was 5 years ago. So, in my description, fractional sales leadership or fractional executives in general are a form of organizational innovation. If you think of the 10 forms of innovation, it falls into the bucket of organizational innovation. And many companies are really good at product innovation, especially in the manufacturing space. It's all
Hmm.
about product innovation. You want to stand out with your product. But when it comes to organizational structures, manufacturing companies tend to be a little bit more conservative and not
Yeah,
as innovative as tech or SaaS companies, for example. And so, to me, the organizational innovation in the fractional sales leadership model is based um, on the question of how much of that human resource, of that talent, do you actually need in a company. And in smaller companies, the answer is often less than one, right? And historically, that has led owners or CEOs to either do nothing or they wait until they can absolutely no longer do without that skill set,
Yeah.
right? Or it has led to multitasking, uh, amassing different functions and tasks into one role until it's big enough to justify a 40-hour a week hiring. In all of this, all of these historic approaches uh, have do and did negatively impact the ability of a company to grow. Multitasking is a colossal waste of resources and time, because when you multitask, not only do you do things that you're not really good at, they were just added into your job description to fill the rap sheet, um, but you also have to switch between different topics. And every time you switch, there is a waste of time and a waste of resources. So it, growth in companies is negatively impacted by either doing nothing or by multitasking. And so the answer is to fractionalize, to make it to right size in engagement. And in the fractional sales leadership world, that means you no longer hire a player coach, which is often the case when you have small sales teams, um, but you hire a leader and you ask yourself, how much leadership do I actually need? And it turns out when you have 2 or 3 reps, that might be 10, 15 hours a week. And that's what you contract for.
Okay, yeah, you talked a lot about the word growth, which I think is interesting, and especially with fractional, leaderships. And you are spot on when you say there's a lot of companies out there, specifically in the space that I'm in, which is the agricultural equipment space, where the CEO might also be the accountant, the janitor, the over the road sales guy, and he's also doing HR work on the side. And to your point with scaling and growing, it's almost next to impossible when that's the case. We're running into a situation in agriculture right now where times are very, very tough. So everybody's is trying to lean down and save a penny here, save a dime there. And so we're seeing a lot of executive people, specifically CEOs, that are doing all these tasking, which is a spot on point that you just brought up. So maybe talk a little bit about how you can see the dollars and cents by hiring fractional to take away some of that multitasking.
Yeah. I mean, it is all about dollars and cents.
Sure.
And we can talk at length about compensation for fractional executives. But back to how do we compare this to multitasking? It's just one of those things that is a waste in an organization. And if you are, and most sales leaders, including myself, have been in this position where you are a player coach, right? You have a small team that you're supposed to manage and lead, and at the same time you have your own quota, and it's always this conflict between those two things. What do you focus your time on and your energy on? Is it helping others be successful, or is it selling yourself? And then manufacturing has yet another trend that I see often. They have a bunch of product experts, but they don't really have sales leadership expertise, right? The guy who was an engineer initially, who knows the product the best, turns into a salesperson, then turns into the sales leader, but there is no leadership expertise, and especially no sales leadership expertise. And
Yeah.
if you are a sales leader in that scenario, do you really need to be the top product expert? Or shouldn't you be the leadership expert that knows how to get others to excel? And I would argue the later. And that's where you bring in a fractional executive. They don't have to be the product expert. They just have to have a basic understanding of what the product does, and then they lead, and they make sure that your sales team excels.
So what do I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I have an answer, so I'll say it too. But sales leader, and you brought up a point where you just said there's a lot of product leaders in companies, which I think is very, very intelligent. So true. But there might not be a lot of sales leaders. So, in your opinion, what do you think sales leader means? Why do you think that's critical to a company? And let me answer first, so I don't want to put you on the
Yeah.
spot. In my opinion, sometimes the customer gets lost. And I think it's arguably the most important part of any business is the customer. It should be. And that is exactly what a good sales leader will do. They are the voice of the customer. They make sure that that customer is taken care of at any and all cost. And I've been thinking about a lot about that lately. I don't know. What's your take on that? Is that you think that's an accurate statement, or would you twist it and spin it around a little bit? What's your thoughts?
Well, there are many aspects, but what I see often is that sales leadership is not viewed as a skill. It's not viewed as something that actually has an impact on the company. If you're an engineering-driven organization that focuses on developing the best possible product, the thinking is often it should sell itself because it is the best product. But in the marketplace today, while it is basically assumed that your product works. If it doesn't, then you shouldn't be in business, and you will quickly be out of business. But that still doesn't mean that it's being sold. And a sales leader is the enabler to make that happen. Sales, if and sales still is a people to people business. So as a sales leader, you deal with people, your salespeople, who in turn are selling to other people. And that is the hardest business to be in because it's all about humans and our flaws. If you're an accountant or a CFO leading a team of accountants, you deal with numbers, a whole lot easier to deal with. There are facts, they exist. Whereas when you deal with people, things change all the time. People are finicky. People are difficult to deal with. Often when founders or owners or CEOs come to me, they don't come to me and say, Henning, I need a fractional sales leader for 2 days a week for 6 months. They come with a problem, with a challenge in sales, right? And that challenge is all in sales in particular is often centered around the lack of growth, the lack of sales, teams not performing, um, owners without leadership experience. They find themselves hiring and firing salespeople right and left because they don't understand them. They don't know how to motivate them, how to train them, how to coach them. There's also often in those organizations a total lack of structure and process that is holding back growth. And then the whole lack of sales skills, the product focus and product experts I mentioned earlier. Um, but of course, then these organizations lack sales and sales leadership skills.
You said a couple very interesting things. One of them was the human to human and understanding the flaws of each other. Uh, Dive into that a little bit. What do you mean by that? The sales is all about human to human interaction and understanding and seeing all of our flaws. What do you mean by that?
Well, if sales was a game of facts, and you just put the facts next to each other and that drives your decision, you wouldn't need salespeople. Because all you would do is you run ChatGPT and say, compare this, run this purchasing decision for me, compare all the different factors, and there you have your decision, and you go online and place the order.
Sure.
But there's still humans involved. And I think in sales, the human aspect has a lot to do with trust and developing trust because what we perceive as facts in sales often aren't really facts. I mean, the price is a number. Yes, you can compare that. But when it comes to performance, product performance, quality, um, there's a lot of BS out there. And as a buyer, you have to develop trust that, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're being presented and pitched with, is truly a fact. And that's the role of a salesperson. But where salespeople are, or dealing with people is finicky, is that, in every human to human interaction, you have this element of communication, which has a sender and a receiver. And no matter how hard you work as a sender, you can't always assume that you can never assume that the receiver actually hears what you're trying to say, or the
Sure.
receiver can never assume that they understood perfectly what the sender intended to say. Um, and then you have, salespeople, and their motivation. And in sales, you're often money motivated. You're driven um, by the incentive plan that's being put out there for you. So owners shouldn't complain about salespeople being money driven, because they drive them by way of their compensation plans. But then those plans need to be structured in a way that is truly motivational and not a deterrent, or sort of leading a salesperson in the wrong direction. If you want a certain product group to be sold, if you want to reach a certain profitability, if you want a certain type of account targeted, make that clear in your comp plan and comp accordingly, not just say X% of everything you sell, because then you have a free for all. And that's just one example of how to structure comp plans right. And then a comp plan is just one example of how managing people is really always the hardest thing in a business.
Yeah. You also mentioned that CEOs, owners of companies have a hard, they might go through salespeople because they just don't understand maybe it's the sales cycle, maybe it's the process. Talk a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah. Yes, it starts with the mindset of a salesperson. If especially in owner-led organizations, where the owner typically has been in sales and sold their product, they 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 hire salespeople by looking for someone that resembles themselves the most. Then they coach them by teaching them how they sold, and they think that they would be successful. I went through this experience myself years and years ago, where the founder of the company taught me his exact script, and I had to repeat his exact about 30-minute script on
Sure.
how to present the company and the product verbatim back to him. And that at that point I was allowed to see clients. I mean, and what's lost in this process is the fact that if you are the owner of the company, if you are possibly the inventor or the designer of the product, you're in a totally different position to a salesperson. Your title is different, your experience is different, and the buyer knows that. And the buyer is looking at a salesperson very differently than they look at the owner of the company. And so a salesperson needs to present the company differently. They need to present themselves differently. And that's just one of the things that a lot of owners do not get right when they hire, train, coach salespeople. And then there are many other things, because if they haven't had the experience of how to build and scale a sales team, they really don't understand the importance of processes. And if they're engineers, they think of processes as being this very linear thing where everything is a yes no decision. Where in sales, in human to human interactions, there's a lot
There's
of
a lot of
maybe,
gray.
and there's a lot of buts. and there's a lot of other things that are gray and not black or white.
Yeah, which sort of enters in a kind of an interesting perspective of that, of sort of an outsider coming into a business, even when a sales team is, they could be there for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years. You start to take on the mentality of the owner or the CEO, and you don't see things outside of the inner box of the company, which can be a little bit dangerous as well, because at that point you're not seeing your flaws. You're also not seeing maybe what it is that does set you apart. You're just seeing this process, this script that you stuck to for years that might need to be rewritten, relooked at, rearranged, changed, to move on forward. So that's why I think there's a very interesting space for a fractional salesperson, fractional VP in something like this, just to get an outsider perspective.
This outside perspective is really important, and it's one thing that I look for when I place executives. I do place executives looking for the exact or very similar experience that the company is going. So the idea is that the executive is able to look the owner or CEO in the eye and can say, I've accomplished before what you are looking to accomplish now, and that's why I'm the best person for you. But you also want to look for people that have other experiences. So someone who spent 30, 40 years in the exact same vertical, doing the exact same thing, maybe for different companies, but pretty much the same thing, isn't as qualified in my perspective as someone who has a diverse set of experiences, who can bring knowledge, who can transfer knowledge from other industries, from other type of products, from other size companies, from other geographies into an organization. If you keep replicating yourself and always look for the same thing over and over again, you stay very narrow, and there's a lot of value in bringing in outside information.
That's a fantastic answer, and so true on outsider perspective, which I want to dive a little bit more into here. Henning, coming in from just maybe a new set of eyes to see things a little bit differently, and share their experiences from other experiences that they've had, to help all industries. What industries are you working with? All industries? Are you working with? Or do you specialize in certain ones? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we operate industry agnostic. We have one of the things that sets us apart from a traditional recruiter is that we have a pre-vetted roster of executives. And if you understand the fractional world, then you know that fractional sales leaders are typically engaged in multiple assignments at the same time. They have a finite length, and so they're always interested in adding and layering additional assignments. So for us to operate in a pre-vetted roster of currently over 900 executives allows us to cover every industry vertical. And probably in the last 2 years, I can't recall a case where we had an issue finding the right executive for a client, because the roster is just so deep and broad that it allows us to do that. We also not only match based on an industry vertical, but we take other factors into account that are important in finding the right sales leader. For example, what type of product are we talking about? Is it an OEM? Is it an aftermarket product? Is it software? Is it a professional service? Who are the decision makers that are being sold to? Is this sold into marketing or into procurement? Is it sold to the CEO? That's an important factor. What type of deal are we talking about? Is this an enterprise type multi-million-dollar, multi-year contract that takes 18 to 24 months to negotiate? Or is this more transactional, $2,000 a pop, one call close, or somewhere in between? So those those sales scenarios also play a factor in our matching. And again, we're looking for somebody who can say, I've done this exact scenario before. And we when we weigh these different factors, the overriding question is always, what makes somebody successful in this role? Is it the industry knowledge? Or is it the knowledge on how to talk to that decision maker? Or is it the knowledge how to structure these types of contracts? Or how to coach a sales team? And all of that then leads us to identifying what we call the perfect match.
Sorry, you said you had about 900 total fractional salespeople on your team now. Is that accurate?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. So talk about the trend there. Have you seen a massive increase? Has it started slower and kind of grown, or what's that trend look like today? And where do you see this going in the future?
Yeah. There are two different trends. There is the supply and demand trend, right? On the supply side, we've seen an increase from maybe 3,000 fractional sales leaders back in 2019 to about 9,000 fractional sales leaders in the US and Canada today. On the demand side, there is a more steady increase of opportunities. It doesn't happen as quickly, but the makeup of these opportunities are changing. So 5 years ago, it was all about tech and SaaS companies. They were the ones who embraced this organizational innovation first. Then we saw an influx of professional services companies, and now we're seeing an influx of manufacturing companies. And I believe that the future will look like so many forms of innovation. They start in startups, in tech and SaaS, and then make their way into the entire makeup of the North American industry. And so eventually, the makeup of fractional sales leadership assignments will reflect the makeup of the industry overall in the US and Canada. And that means a continued increase of opportunities in professional services and manufacturing. And ultimately, tech and SaaS may make up 15 or 20% of those opportunities, and the rest will be in those other areas.
And what about your answer to the question of there's a disconnect between a fractional sales leader versus an in-house, W-2 person? What's your answer to that? I'm sure you get that question quite a bit.
When you say disconnect, you mean they're
meaning you're not a company person, you're not in the day-to-day, you're not that type of thing.
Yeah, that's entirely a misconception.
Yes.
Right? It starts with referring to a fractional executive, for example, as a gun for hire, right? What's a full-time employee but a gun for hire? You're trading your salary for work. That's a gun for hire. 10 years of employees have gone shorter and shorter over the years. Back, my dad worked for one company his entire life. That is unheard of today. That just doesn't happen. So 10 years get shorter and shorter. Employees know that when the going gets tough, they're getting fired. And the employers know that if the guy down the street offers $1.50 more, that the employees are gone. And it's not quite there yet in manufacturing, but in tech and SaaS, where these trends show up first, the average tenure of a VP of sales is between 12 and 18 months. That's the average tenure. So you might as well go fractional, right? And part of that is then ties in with the question of commitment. There is this misconception that fractional executives aren't as committed. Now, there are studies out there that tell you that contractors are actually more committed than full-time employees because their future work relies on referrals and their reputation and their track record. And they're paid on an understanding of goals because they're brought in to achieve very specific goals, not the generic job descriptions that full-time executives are hired against. So fractional executives are more committed than full-time employees.
That's super interesting. 12 to 18 months is the average tenure of a new VP of sales. Wow. I think we were sold in my generation sort of a bill of goods by saying, go to college, get as many degrees as you can, and then go work for a company and work your way up the ladder, put your money in your 401k and stay there for 35 years until you retire. And, those trends are completely gone. And I think, man, to your point on manufacturing, there may be the lagger behind tech and some of these other industries, but they're starting to slowly see these trends and realize, hang on a second, to your point, maybe the fractional leader is more engaged, and let's go explore this route. So there's very, very intelligent stuff there, Henning. I love it. Definitely marked it. Those are going to be viral moments, my friend.
Good. Good.
Well, just to kind of wind down here, why don't you kind of tell people about a little bit about Vendux, how you get in touch, what's the best way to reach you, and kind of hear more about this, both on a supply and a demand thing.
Yeah. Well, we're interested in connecting on both sides. We're interested to grow our roster of executives. And at the same time, we're always interested to help companies find the right executive. You can find us on a website, vendux.org, vendux.org. And then if you go to LinkedIn and look for my name, you'll only find one, and that's me. So it's pretty easily identifiable if you want to get in touch with me. And I'm very eager and open to working with more companies, helping more business owners, and working with more executives.
Yeah, I'm just to kind of cap this off. I'm super grateful for our relationship, even though it's only been here a couple of weeks since we've known each other. But the one thing I've maybe learned over the past 20 years too is surround yourself with good people, and good things are going to happen. And that can be a lesson for all the businesses out there that are looking for any type of work, or including your business, Vendux, where you're trying to find the right people. And you're definitely one of those guys. You're doing the right thing. You're working hard, and you're grinding. And I appreciate that when I meet people, for sure. So thank you for our relationship. I look forward to staying in touch here. We've got a couple other things that are in the hopper, which I think is good, and I'm excited about those. So appreciate you very much for coming on, and until the next time, my friend.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you as well.
Okay. Thank you, Henning. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, folks, thanks for tuning into the Germinate podcast. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others in the industry. And join me next time as we continue to explore the innovations and strategies shaping the future of agriculture and business. Until then, keep growing, keep innovating, and keep germinating your success.